Tonight, we're going to refinish a kitchen table and learn what to do and what not to do. For many of us, our kitchen table is the one piece of wood furniture that gets the most abuse out of anything else in the house. Everything gets put on the table, hot and cold, wet and dry, smooth, and sometimes even a sharp fork. My kids beat up on our table to no end, and over time, it can get pretty ragged. A friend of mine recently asked me to refinish his kitchen table because the finish on the top was cracking and separating from the wood. The original finish on it was a sprayed-on lacquer, which was fine on the surface, but over time, the wood expanded and contracted and cracks started appearing in the surface. Moisture then got into those cracks and started to work its way between the finish and the wood itself. So over time, you can see these areas where the finish is separated from the wood, which is really bad. So this baby needed a complete refinish. Before you do any refinishing on a table, you need to make sure that it's solid wood. If it has a veneer or a thin layer of wood on the top of it, that's going to change really quickly once you start sanding it. You usually don't want to do a refinish on those tables unless you can get that finish to come off really easily without very much sanding. Refinishing should almost always start with chemically stripping off the old finish. Some people try to just rough sand it and then apply another finish on top, but especially if you're trying to keep the character of the wood and you want to see that grain coming through, you need to take off the old stuff. This process can get a bit messy, but it's worth it because you're chemically taking that finish off of the wood. That gives you a head start for the sanding you're going to do in the next step. The most common mistake people make when using a paint stripper or a finish stripper is leaving it on too long or too short. Make sure to read the directions of the stripper you're using and use it exactly as directed. It's okay to work in small sections, and it's also okay to go back and do it again to try to get more finish off. Make sure to brush it on thick and let it soak into the finish. You'll know it's ready when you can scrape off the finish and you get some nice chunks of gunk in there. Scrape off as much as you can with a plastic scraper and then put it in a plastic bag or something you can throw away, because when this stuff dries, it is nasty. Once you remove everything you can with the scraper, wash it down with mineral spirits, which will loosen all the residue and any remaining finish in there. Now you're ready for sanding. Sanding an old finish can take a lot of sandpaper, so make sure you have multiple pieces and multiple grits. I would use at least 3 different grits. I started out with 80, then I went to 120 or 150, and then you go up to 220. The 80 grit does most of the work in getting the remaining finish off and making it nice and consistent. Once you have the whole thing consistently sanded with 80, then step it up to 120 and do the entire surface. Then you go to 220 and get your final smooth finish. A common mistake people will make in sanding is they'll skip grits. So if you go from an 80 to a 220 without anything in the middle, you end up still having visible scratches on the surface. And you may not see it as much when you're sanding, but the minute you put that finish on, those scratches will come right through and you'll see them. So take your time and progress through at least 3 grits. I like to use a random orbital sander when I'm doing large surfaces like this because it's a lot easier to go in any direction. You don't have to worry as much about sanding with the grain. If you use one of these, sand in large overlapping circular patterns to cover the entire surface and make sure you don't have any areas that get worn too deep. This particular table already had a lot of waves and surface variation in it, so I wasn't too concerned about getting it perfectly flat. It's also really important to sand off all of the finish. Sometimes you'll get some little stains or rings where the color has soaked in deeper into the wood. If you don't take care of it now and you can see it now, it'll be even more visible when you put the finish on. Once you've sanded it smooth and you're ready for finish, you got to decide what you're going to put on it. In general, if you want a more durable finish with maybe a semi-gloss look to it, polyurethane is probably going to be your best bet. If you want a more subtle matte finish that doesn't scream that it has finish on it, use a hard wax oil finish. These ones are also really easy to apply. If you want something that's even more natural looking, that's easy to repair, go with an oil finish. If you want to stain your table, your stain goes on first, but you definitely need a top coat to protect that. The stain just adds the color. So choose one of those other types of finishes to go on top of the stain. As long as the stain is dry, you can usually use whatever top coat you want. But typically, an oil-based stain will work better with an oil-based finish. A water-based stain works better with a water-based finish. That being said, if you want to use an oil-based stain and a water-based finish, it's possible. You just have to make sure the stain is totally dry before you put on the top coat. Make sure to test the color somewhere on your table before you do the whole thing. The bottom of the table can actually be great for this. For this table, my friend wanted a more glossy look to match the table base, which I was not refinishing. So I got a product from Rockler called Armor Seal. This is a great oil-based polyurethane product. I got out my Armor Seal, I put on the first coat, and I realized as it started to dry that this was going to make it a lot more yellow than I was looking for. Oil-based finishes usually add a bit of an amber tone to the wood. So in this case, the strips of wood that were lighter, it actually turned kind of yellow. And that was not the look I was going for. So I sanded off that first coat and I got out my high performance polyurethane, which is a water-based product, and applied that instead. This stuff is actually really durable, and I've used it for the stair railings in my own house. When applying this finish or any other polyurethane, it's very important that you avoid any bubbles in the product. When that dries, it will cause a rough texture in your finish. So use your foam brush and go through and smooth it out and pop any bubbles that you see. Follow the directions of whatever product you're using and apply it exactly as directed. And then between coats, I like to go back with some 320 grit sandpaper. After that first coat, it's often gonna have a lot of texture on it that you need to smooth out. You can do 320 between each coat, but on your final coat, you wanna use a white Scotch-Brite or the extra fine version and just knock down just the dust nibs. Because if you use the 320 in that, you're actually gonna sand through layers of finish. For this tabletop, I did 4 coats of the polyurethane finish, and then I added another coat of a wax finish on top of that. Now for this, I like to use Odie's wax, which is a great product to add another layer of waterproofing on top of the polyurethane. The polyurethane will usually do a pretty good job being water resistant, but if you add another layer of wax on top, it adds even more protection. I like this stuff because it's super easy to use and it smells really good too. You wipe this wax on all over the table, let it sit for about 90 minutes. Once it's dried, you can buff it with a cloth or a rotary wheel, and this will bring it up to the gloss or the semi-gloss shine you're looking for. At this point, it should be looking good, but I wouldn't put water on it just yet. Most finishes take about 30 days to fully cure. So wait at least a week or 2 before you use it regularly. And then after that, I would wait 3 to 4 weeks before you actually put a cup with condensation on the side right on it. You can use placemats or coasters before that, but that way you give it that full month to totally cure and harden on the wood. Refinishing a table isn't too bad if you take your time and make sure you prep and clean it well. It's a great way to take an old piece of furniture and bring it back to life. Let me know if you've ever refinished a piece of furniture and what you did right and what you learned the hard way. Now, go build something, and we'll see you next time.